talk to you a little bit about the science and what our data is showing. And the question always for an organization like ours is, what does this mean for the bay that we protect? That's our mission, to improve and protect. And what are we going to do about it? So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. So Mike explained to you that when stormwater delivers excess nitrogen to Casco Bay, we get algal blooms. That's not theoretical. This is a cove in South Portland where we see thick blooms like this every year. This is very thick algal bloom, so thick that all of the juvenile clams underneath died. They became very stressed out, and in the course of a week we were able to measure in the sediment big downward dip in pH level, and you can see the sediment turned black. There's no oxygen exchange. The other thing we're seeing with these mats is that in places it's also thick, so that the juvenile, the baby clams that are traveling around and trying to then settle into clam flats can't settle. They're literally smothering to death on the top of the algal blooms. So before these blooms contribute to coastal acidification, they can do a lot of localized harm to the species that depend upon our clam flats. And poor clams, speaking of clams, Mike told you about lab experiments. We've also seen that when you take clams from a hatchery environment where the pH is buffered in that environment and put them out on flats where the acidity isn't buffered, that they get pitted. And then finally, the trifecta for our poor clam population. As ocean temperatures increase, there are more and more invasive green crabs that just demolish the juvenile clam populations. And some of the researchers who have been doing studies in Casco Bay have determined that less than 1% of clams are now making it to adulthood, soft-shell clams. Not good. What are some of the other impacts? Mike mentioned the shift in species. This is just the shift in species of lobster. It's many species, but that's so iconic for us. And so you can see from the 1960s, the shift both offshore and north. So species are shifting east and north. And again, this is sort of like things about lobsters, but it applies to many species. This is at the bottom of the food chain. This is a copepod, and some researchers in Maine have been studying the impacts of warming waters on copepods, and they found that in warmer waters, the copepods don't grow as fat and healthy. And why is that a problem? Copepods are the primary food of juvenile lobsters, so if juvenile lobsters aren't getting the nutrition they need, kind of like giving them skim milk instead of whole milk, they're not going to grow as big and fat and healthy, or they're putting more energy into growing than they would under normal conditions. Also, with an increase in water temperatures, there's a correlation with an increase in lobster shell disease, and this is not what we want for Maine. So what do we do about this? We have a boat, and we use our boat not just for science, but as an office. And it's a great place to hold a meeting, because when I call people and say, do you want to meet me on the boat? People say yes. So we get people out on the boat, we go to problem areas on the bay. It helps immensely because people can see the problem from the water perspective, and we can come up with solutions. So on a particular trip like this, we've got the gentleman who's the head of the division in the Department of Environmental Protection that writes all the Clean Water Act discharge permits. So he's out on the water looking at the situation. We have EPA staff, we have someone from the sewage treatment plant. So we can get everybody together and talk about what can we do about a particular problem. So what's some of the things that we've done? We know that nitrogen loading, as Mike told you, is a problem because it fertilizes algal blooms, and both at the phytoplankton level and those blooms like you saw in that cove. And so we've worked hard to ensure that every wastewater treatment facility that discharges into Casco Bay has to test for nitrogen levels so that in those places where we don't have enough information, we can find out what the load is that they're contributing to the bay. In areas where we're seeing problems, and we were seeing problems in the vicinity of the East End facility here in Portland, we're able to sort of say what can be done to reduce the amount of nitrogen that you're putting out. So in their permit, which issued a few years ago, they agreed, it came out officially 2 years ago. So they went through a summer where they upgraded the plant, and then last summer was the first year that they operated these basins in a different way. And their goal was to see if they could reduce the amount of nitrogen they were putting out by 20 to 40%. They achieved a 72% reduction on average. And it was the first time we did not see an algal bloom in Back Cove, and it's 1 year, so we can't say that's not definitive proof, but we're very optimistic and very excited about this change. We also worked with the state legislature in 2014 to create a commission to study the impacts of ocean and coastal acidification on Maine's marine waters. And my predecessor, Joe Pinney, who's in the audience, served on this commission, and Kathy, our executive director, and I were very instrumental in lobbying in the legislature for passage of this bill. So this report led to a report back to the legislature with recommendations. And one of the recommendations was that an ongoing legislatively created council be formed to continue to coordinate research about these issues and to recommend policy actions. And that didn't happen in 2015. There wasn't it wasn't the right political climate, there weren't the right resources at that time. But what we did get is a small group of us worked together, Island Institute, Maine Sea Grant, University of Maine, and Friends of Casco Bay, and we created the Maine Ocean and Coastal Acidification Partnership. This is a completely voluntary partnership of scientists and policymakers and people who care and are working on this issue to continue the work recommended by that Legislative Study Commission. So since 2016, that group, the Maine Ocean and Coastal Acidification Partnership, has held 2 symposia a year, has acted as a forum for all the researchers to get together and share their data and make sure they're calibrating their equipment the same so that they can compare what they're finding, and has tried to carry forth the recommendations of the study commission. But we have no money, and we have no authority to recommend anything. It's completely voluntary. It's not even a nonprofit organization. So, in November of 2018, we met with the newly elected bipartisan Coastal Caucus of the Maine legislature, and we discussed what do we need to do in 2019. And the plan came forward to pass a bill, to present a bill to create an advisory council to look at the impacts of climate change, not just ocean and coastal acidification, but all climate change on Maine's marine species, and to create an action plan to inform the work of this council, to bridge the gap between our voluntary actions and what this council should do. This bill was considered a top priority. There's a group of 34 nonprofits from all around Maine that have different environmental missions. They meet before each legislative session, and they vote on the bills that are the most important to pass. And of the 5 climate change bills that they selected, this bill to create a Marine Advisory Council was one of them. And so right now what we're waiting for, let me just go back here for a second, is that the governor has also introduced a bill to create a climate change commission. You may have heard about this in the news, and it's kind of like a we're going to do everything commission. So we're waiting to see just how comprehensive it can be without losing what needs to happen. And so we're trying to see if the Marine and Coastal subcommittee of that Climate Change Council can do everything we've put forward in the Advisory Council bill. So either working on a separate independent bill or making sure it's part of the governor's action. Either way, the plan is to make sure there's some sanctioned body to carry forward the work that we know is important for Maine's marine environment. There's three main things that this council would do. First, it would have the authority to recommend actions to protect marine species. Second, it would continue to coordinate long-term research and collaboration. That's really important because, as Mike was saying, we didn't even know until a few years ago that we needed to be looking at calcium carbonate saturation states, and it takes long-term data sets to better understand and plan for the future. And third, it would continue to increase awareness through programs like this where students are out in the clam flats and learning about the impacts of increased predation and changes in water chemistry on Maine softshell clam populations. So, of course, you're here because you care about Casco Bay and you care about the marine environment. So what can you do to help us? The first is, please make your voice heard. If you would like, you can sign up to be on our email list when this bill is up for hearing, whether it's as part of the Governor's Climate Change Council or a separate standalone council. Please let your legislators know this matters to you, that this problem is here now, and we need to act now. The second thing you can do is continue to help us with the science. Mike and I try to be everywhere on the bay, but we can't be. And we have a new program using an app where volunteers can help us track things. Like maybe you pick a particular bay and you're the person who checks it all the time for algal blooms. And we have bays we want checked. And so you can report things back to us like that. Sea level rise, storm surge, all kinds of things that help us document climate change. And so on that note, I hope you will join us in protecting Casco Bay, and I'd like to invite our executive director back up to coordinate questions and answers.